I returned to the site with a friend of mine. I chose the anniversary of the sighting on the presumption that perhaps they're migratory and probably the best chance of gaining another sighting of them would be to go back on the anniversary.
Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments.
Our final speaker for this very, very long Saturday that started at 9 a.m. in the morning is Sergeant Todd Neiss from Sandy, Oregon, who had a sighting of 3 individuals in the state of Oregon. Please welcome Todd Neiss, our final speaker for this evening.
My name is Todd Neiss, and I've been asked to recount an encounter that I had back in April of 1993, a little over 4 years ago. I'll go through it, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to fill in any details you might want afterwards. I was with the 1249th Combat Engineers in the Oregon Army National Guard, and we were on a training exercise in private timberland approximately 6 miles east of Seaside, Oregon, in a heavily gated area that is patrolled by security, that is off limits to the public. We had gotten special permission to go in there because of its remoteness and the fact that it had appropriate areas that we could practice our demolition, which is what we do as combat engineers. A large part of it is demolition. We had 3 sites. We had blasted, we had cutting charges that we had done at the first site. The second site, up the road a ways, was, we had a mock minefield that was laid out for us, and a triple strand concertina wire obstacle that we were to blow up, which we had done with the help of about 100 pounds of C4 plastic explosive. Typically, when we do the demolition exercises, we set the fuses. We normally have an 8 to 10 minute time span in which to convoy out of the area to a safety staging area. Never really getting a direct view of the blast, but we await the report of the blast and then go back and check our work, make sure we did it properly. On this particular third site that we had moved to, we had a cratering charge set up the exercise that we were doing with ammonium nitrate. After we had set the charges, we all got into our vehicles and convoyed down off the hill. During this convoy, I was riding in the second Humvee as a passenger. I had a driver and an A driver sitting in front of me, and I happened to sit on the left-hand side of the vehicle and had my windows zipped down and had a very clear view, and I was looking down at the second blast site. From the road and actually from the third blast site, you had a very clear view of the second blast site. Again, a rock quarry out in the middle of the woods. This is where they'd get their gravel for doing more logging roads and whatnot. I glanced out the window down to the second pit and saw 3 very large, dark figures standing down in this rock quarry, looking directly up at the convoy that was descending off the hill. A very interesting set of things to go through one's mind when you see something like this. Your mind tries to rationalize this as anything but what it is, what you are actually seeing, and the thought process in a matter of perhaps less than 10 seconds was, there's people, no, those aren't people, there's animals. Those aren't any animals I've seen. Deer, elk, bear, and then finally it just sinks in on you. You're seeing what you're seeing. And what I saw specifically were these three creatures. One in the center, standing a full head taller than the others. I would guesstimate to be between 7 and 8 feet in height. Flanked on either side by, I hate to use the word smaller, but a full head shorter than the larger one. The larger one stood very stoically, not moving at all. The two that stood on either side of them had this side-to-side rocking motion. It looked like they were just basically shifting their weight from foot to foot. But again, all of them staring up at the roadway as we were coming down. And again, this is not with a tree backdrop or anything like that. This is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, bright blue sky, standing in the middle of a rock quarry with a slate gray background behind them. So it was very, very stark contrast. I watched these creatures for probably 25 seconds or so before the brush whipped up in my view and obscured my vision from that point. And I realized I wasn't, frantically trying to see if I could see anything more, and I didn't get another advantage of it. And I slumped back in my seat and pondered what I had just seen. And I chose to make a statement to the driver just to get a specific reaction that I was looking for. I said to him, well, at least somebody's going to get a good view of the blast. And he shot back. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, there's 3 people down there at that other site. And he shot back with the answer that I knew to be the truth anyway, which was, no, there isn't. We have 100% squad integrity, meaning everybody was accounted for, which you have to have in a situation like that. With that said, I chose to zip my lip and sit back and, again, just kind of, it's a very strange feeling to not really know. It's frustrating to not know where do you go with this. Who do you tell? Do you tell anybody? And I pretty much resigned myself to just file that one away and be, file that away, and you just were very lucky and just don't mention it to anybody, which I'm sure is quite common. It wasn't until I had reached the safety staging area, and again I was in one of the first couple of Jeeps that had made it down there, that I chose that while we were waiting for the rest of the convoy to catch up with us, to walk back up the road a little bit and see if I couldn't get a view of them. And I went up probably 150 meters up the road, and unfortunately I wasn't able to. There was a bit of a knoll there blocking my view. But as I'm standing there doing one of these numbers, another sergeant, Sergeant Martin, who I had not spoken word one to that day. He was with the heavy equipment section that was attached to our unit. Came walking up the road and said something I'll never forget. Jeff says, hey Neiss, what are you looking at? And I said, well, nothing. And then he shot back with, did you happen to see what I saw at the second blast site? And my jaw just dropped. And I said, I don't know, what did you see? And he went on to say, well, for lack of a better word, what I saw were 3 very large, hair-covered Bigfoot. And at that point, Jeff, I saw him too. It was a tremendous relief to have known that I wasn't alone in seeing them. And since that time, there have been 2 other soldiers that have come forward and also mentioned that they had seen them. Keep in mind, although we didn't have a large number of troops up there, the vast majority of them were either focusing on driving down this very narrow mountain road, or they were stuck in the back of covered 2.5 trucks looking at each other. So I happened to be in a position where I didn't need to focus on the road, and I happened to be on the right side of the vehicle and in the right place at the right time. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
You sent me some color photocopies of droppings. Are those droppings from that particular area?
Yes, I can only think of one I would have sent to you. Did it also include some coyote scat that was in the back?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, approximately a year later, I returned to the site with a friend of mine. I chose the anniversary of the sighting on the presumption that perhaps they're migratory and probably the best chance of gaining another sighting of them would be to go back on the anniversary. And I spent 4 days up there, and while we were up there, we found actually quite fairly old dropping, very large, rather the equivalent in terms of size as perhaps a cow dropping, but tubular. And ironically, no more than a couple feet away in the same picture, you would see coyote scat, bone white, obviously from eating bones and calcium, and it's just very handy for comparison anyway. That sample was sent to Dr. Henry Fehrenbach of the Oregon Primate Research Institute, and he told me at the time I gave it to him, there's no way he's going to be able to tell what it is. He said he could simply analyze what is in there, analyze the diet, and tell us, eliminate what it could not be. In that analysis, he found that that single dropping held deer or elk bone fragments and hair, and also the hair of rabbit and squirrel or something like that. So we're talking about, whatever put that down, we're talking about something that we can pretty much consume quite a bit in one meal. Yeah.
How close do you suspect that the three subjects could have been actually caught up in the blast, actually getting hurt, killed? What's your suspicion there? Were they minutes away, seconds away?
Well, they obviously had to have been awfully close. What we found out later, Sergeant Martin and I, after I convinced him to come to a class on the subject, by offering him a ride, I took him back home and we sat down in his apartment, and I sketched it out because there was a bit of a discrepancy where I said that they were right here and he said no, they were here. It was only like 75 yards, but there was a slight difference in the story, plus the fact that he claimed to have seen them walk out of the pit into the tree line, which is something I did not get to see. Getting back to what you were saying, how close could they have been? In hindsight, I believe that they were observing us, only because Jeff's unit was up at the third site while we were down at the second site placing the charges, which also gave him the advantage of comparing people, humans, in uniform at the very same vantage point that he saw these creatures. And he said there was no comparison at all.
Is there a remote possibility that these things
Going to be called on.
could have shown where the blast site was?
Oh, absolutely. What I'm alluding to is that Jeff had mentioned to me that he had heard something, somewhat of a yip kind of a sound that didn't make sense to him while he was up there. And it was only after he had mentioned that I recall I was placing charges next to mines myself, and I was in charge of the squad. And when you're in a combat mode like that, you're practicing, noise and light discipline. And I was tying in charges to the main line, and I heard this whoop sound, kind of like a teenager might make. And I remember looking up, and I was going to get on my squad for breaching the noise discipline, and I realized that it came from beyond that area. But this was before my sighting, so I never put it together until Jeff had mentioned that he had heard a strange sound down there too. So I think they were probably observing us. Tracks that were found later were down on a hill down below, which would have shielded them, and it's in the same direction that Jeff said he saw him walk out, which would have shielded him from any direct blast. Well, I guarantee it was raining rocks, all probably within several hundred, maybe even 1,000 meters of there. It was raining down rocks. And keep in mind too, a lot of people think it's strange that, you know, why an explosion would bring them out. Well, ask yourself this: considering the security that was involved, even though we only came in from one access road, we had to put guards at all three access roads into that area. We came in and out of one. There were a couple very bored soldiers sitting at a couple of the roads just to ensure that other people didn't get in there. Ask yourself, if you were somehow got past all that security and you happen to be standing in the woods and you see this mushroom cloud go up, are you and your two buddies going to go walking into a demolition zone knowing, wondering whether or not there's more charges left to go? And many times we do sequential explosions too. I think they were very curious. I think the curiosity got the best of them. I think they felt safe enough that we had moved up on the hillside. They knew that we had left that area, gone up there, and I think that's when their curiosity got the best of them. That's when they compromised themselves. Is there another question? Somebody else have a
Back here.
Can't see it. Yes.
With your access to the Bigfoot Research Project files, do you have any other encounters with military personnel and/or incursions onto military installations?
Well, first of all, I've never had direct access to the project files, other than adding to them, I suppose.
Well, beyond that, have you heard of any then?
I have heard of no other military encounters other than just gentlemen before me, so that's the second.
Why, this area, why is it closed off? Is it private land?
Yes, at that time it was owned by Cavenham Industries. It's since been sold, I believe, to Weyerhaeuser. But what's happened is, in the lovely Lochita society we have, people are lawsuit happy. They had no less than 6 lawsuits pending against them, mainly from teenagers going up into the property. When I originally lived at the coast, when I first moved there, you could go in and out there with ease. We used to go up there and go planking and hunting and fishing and all that. But somebody goes up there, drove off the road, flipped upside down. They had a lawsuit on that. Somebody drowned in the Lewis and Clark River. They had a lawsuit on that. And Bob Teagle, who was at that time in charge of that whole area, very reluctantly gave us the keys, the main keys to get in there, and only on the condition that should we run into security, which we did several times, that we were merely telling them that we were there on his permission and on biological research, and if they had any more questions to talk to people. But it was locked off specifically because they had 6 different lawsuits going, and the only way they could really control that was to hire security to run through. It's quite a large area. I would venture to guess it's over 100 square miles.
Where is it?
Basically the Saddle Mountain watershed. If you're familiar with that, Green Mountain, Saddle Mountain kind of dump into that Clatsop County area up there. But this was on the Lewis and Clark main line between Saddle Mountain Park Road and 101. Anybody else? Can't even see yourself.
Tom,
Got a question for you.
yeah, so after the blast, you went back and the only thing you found in the area was strange looking dropping?
No. You're talking about two completely different, you're talking a year apart.
So they're not related at all?
No, the funny thing is that when we first went back there, part of our agreement with Forrester, or with the Cavenham company, was that we would have to clean up any mess, basically make it look like we'd never been there, other than a few craters. The minefield, these are mock inner mines. They didn't have charge, but they were the steel casings, and they went everywhere. The wire, triple strand concertina was hanging in the trees. We made an excuse, Sergeant Merton and I made an excuse when we got back there. Everybody was policing up the area. We made an excuse to go up on a little higher up on the quarry where we had seen them in order hopefully to see some tracks. And unfortunately, the ground was very solid, and we couldn't. The droppings you're referring to were found a year later when I went back with a friend of mine, and we were up there probably 2 days before we even found it, and it wasn't that far from where we were. It was right on a gravel road, actually.
So I guess we can assume you didn't blast the shit out of them.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.